Maria Santos stepped off the military transport truck at Fort Davidson, her boots hitting the dusty ground with determination. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as she shouldered her duffel bag and looked around at her new assignment. At 28, she was older than most of the fresh recruits, but her weathered hands and the way her eyes constantly scanned the horizon told a different story than her personnel file suggested. The other soldiers gathering for orientation barely glanced her way. To them, she looked like just another desk jockey being transferred between bases. Her uniform was crisp, her posture military perfect, but there was something about her quiet demeanor that made her seem unremarkable to the rowdy group of young soldiers. "Great, another pencil pusher," muttered Sergeant Jake Morrison under his breath to his buddy. At 22, Morrison had completed one deployment to a relatively quiet zone and considered himself a combat veteran. His friend, Corporal Tommy Chun, snickered in agreement. They had been stationed at Fort Davidson for 8 months, mostly doing training exercises and equipment maintenance. Maria heard the comment, but said nothing. She had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, especially in the military. She focused instead on memorizing the layout of the base, noting exit routes, and defensive positions out of habit. Old habits from her previous life died hard. During the welcome briefing, Colonel Richards introduced the new arrivals to the base's mission and protocols. Fort Davidson served as a training facility and logistics hub, supporting operations across the region. It was considered a safe assignment, far from any real action. Most soldiers stationed there were either fresh out of basic training or winding down their careers in administrative roles. "We run a tight ship here," Colonel Richards announced to the group. "You'll find Fort Davidson operates differently than combat zones. We focus on training, preparation, and supporting our brothers and sisters in the field." Maria noticed how some of the younger soldiers exchanged glances when he mentioned combat zones, as if they were eager to prove themselves in real battle. She remembered having those same thoughts once, before she learned what combat actually meant. After the briefing, soldiers were assigned to their barracks and duty stations. Maria was placed in the communications department, tasked with managing encrypted transmissions and coordinating with field units. It was exactly the kind of assignment that reinforced the other soldiers' assumptions about her background. As she unpacked her belongings in the women's barracks, her bunkmate, Private Lisa Wong, struck up a conversation. Lisa was 19 and fresh out of communication school, excited about her first real assignment. "So where were you stationed before this?" Lisa asked, arranging her personal photos on her nightstand. "A few different places," Maria replied vaguely, hanging up her uniforms. She noticed Lisa's photos showed family barbecues and graduation ceremonies, the normal life of someone who hadn't yet seen the harder side of military service. "I heard some of the guys saying you're probably coming from a desk job at the Pentagon or something," Lisa continued, not meaning any harm. "Must be nice to finally get some field experience, right?" Maria smiled politely. "Something like that." Over the next few days, Maria fell into the routine of base life. She arrived early for her shifts, performed her duties efficiently, and kept to herself during downtime. Her work in communications was flawless. She handled encrypted channels with an expertise that impressed her supervising officer, Captain Reynolds. "You've got a real knack for this, Santos," Captain Reynolds commented one afternoon as Maria effortlessly managed simultaneous communication from 3 different field units. "Where did you learn to handle multiple channels like that?" Previous assignment involved a lot of coordination. Maria answered simply, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she relayed critical supply information to a unit requesting medical equipment. What Captain Reynolds didn't know was that Maria's previous assignment had been a forward operating base in Afghanistan, where she had spent 18 months coordinating communications under constant threat of attack. She had learned to handle multiple urgent transmissions while incoming mortar rounds shook the communications bunker. During mealtimes, Maria often sat alone or with Lisa, observing the social dynamics of the base. The soldiers naturally formed groups based on their backgrounds and experiences. The combat veterans, even those with limited deployment experience, held an unofficial higher status. They swapped stories about their deployments, often embellishing details to impress the newer recruits. Morrison and his circle were particularly vocal about their experiences. They dominated conversations in the mess hall, describing firefights and patrol missions with the confidence of seasoned warriors. Other soldiers listened with obvious admiration, especially those who hadn't yet deployed. The thing about real combat, Morrison would say, leaning back in his chair, is that you find out who's really got what it takes. All the training in the world can't prepare you for when the bullets start flying. Chim would nod knowingly. Most people just freeze up. It's a natural response, but in combat, freezing gets people killed. Maria continued eating her meal, but her hand unconsciously tightened around her fork. She remembered the first time she had been under fire, how the training had kicked in automatically while her conscious mind struggled to process what was happening. She remembered dragging wounded soldiers to safety while machine gun fire stitched patterns in the sand around her. One evening, during a particularly animated storytelling session, Morrison noticed Maria sitting quietly at a nearby table. Something about her composed demeanor irritated him. While other soldiers hung on his every word, she seemed completely uninterested in his war stories. "Hey, Santos," he called out, loud enough for half the mess hall to hear. "What do you think about combat? Ever wonder what's really like?" Maria looked up from her meal, meeting his gaze calmly. "I imagine it's different for everyone," she said simply. Morrison's friends chuckled. "Different how?" Morrison pressed, sensing an opportunity to demonstrate his superior experience. "I mean, you've probably never been anywhere more dangerous than a supply depot, right?" "Something like that," Maria replied, returning to her meal. Chun joined in, emboldened by Morrison's lead. "No offense, but you desk jockeys have no idea what real soldiers go through. The stress, the split-second decisions, the responsibility of keeping your unit alive." Other soldiers in the mess hall had stopped their own conversations to listen. Some looked uncomfortable with the direction of the discussion, but others seemed entertained by what they saw as harmless banter between combat veterans and support personnel. Maria finished her meal in silence while Morrison continued his commentary about the differences between real soldiers and administrative personnel. She had heard variations of this conversation many times throughout her military career. Some soldiers needed to establish hierarchies based on their perceived combat experience. She had learned not to take it personally. As she stood to clear her tray, Morrison made one final comment. "Just remember, Santos, if anything real ever happens here, stay out of the way and let the combat veterans handle it." Maria paused for a moment, looking back at Morrison with an expression that was neither angry nor defensive. "I'll keep that in mind," she said quietly, and walked away. What none of the soldiers in that mess hall knew was that Maria had more combat experience than all of them combined. Her personnel file, classified at levels far above their clearance, contained commendations for valor under fire, Purple Heart recommendations, and mission reports that would reshape their understanding of what real combat looked like. But Maria had learned that respect earned through boasting was hollow. Real respect came through actions, and she was content to let her actions speak for themselves when the time came. The time would come sooner than anyone expected. 2 weeks into her assignment at Fort Davidson, Maria had settled into a predictable routine. The morning desert air was still cool when she arrived at the communications center each day, often beating even the early shift officers to their posts. Her efficiency and attention to detail had already earned quiet praise from Captain Reynolds, though she remained largely invisible to most of the base personnel. The mockery had become a regular part of her experience. Morrison and his friends had taken to making jokes whenever she passed their table in the mess hall or walked by during their training exercises. Their comments ranged from suggestions that she must be afraid of loud noises to speculation about whether she had ever held a weapon outside of basic training. "I bet Santos jumps every time someone slams a door," Chun said loudly one afternoon as Maria walked past their group during physical training. Several soldiers laughed, though a few looked uncomfortable with the ongoing harassment. Private First Class David Kumar, a quiet soldier from Maria's communications unit, had started sitting with her during meals. He had noticed the treatment she was receiving and felt it was unfair, though he didn't know how to address it directly. "You don't have to take that, you know," Kumar said quietly one evening as they ate dinner. "You could report it to the captain." Maria appreciated his concern, but she had dealt with worse situations than a few soldiers with inflated egos. "It's fine, Kumar. They'll get bored eventually." "But it's not right," Kumar insisted. "They don't even know you. How can they judge what you've done or where you've been?" Maria smiled slightly. Kumar was young, probably 21 or 22, with the earnest desire to do the right thing that she remembered from her own early days in the service. "Sometimes people need to feel important," she explained gently. "Making others seem smaller makes them feel bigger." What Maria didn't share with Kumar was that she had learned this lesson in much more dangerous circumstances. She remembered being the only woman in a forward reconnaissance unit, enduring months of skeptical comments from soldiers who doubted her abilities. She had proven herself by being the first to spot enemy positions, the most accurate with long-range communications, and the calmest under pressure during firefights. The irony wasn't lost on her that Morrison and Chin's worst day in combat probably didn't compare to her average Tuesday at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. During the third week, base routine was interrupted by news that a training exercise would take place involving simulated combat scenarios. Units would be assigned different roles, including defensive positions, patrol simulations, and emergency response drills. The exercise was designed to test readiness and coordination between different departments. Morrison's unit was assigned to lead the patrol simulations, a role that significantly boosted his already considerable ego. During the briefing, he made several comments about showing the support personnel how real tactical operations worked. "This is going to be good," he told his friends after the briefing. Finally, a chance to show these desk jockeys what military operations actually look like. Chen nodded enthusiastically. "Maybe Santos will learn something about how combat units operate. Might give her some respect for what we do." Maria's communications unit was assigned to coordinate the exercise, managing radio traffic between different elements, and maintaining contact with base command. It was exactly the kind of support role that reinforced the other soldiers' assumptions about her capabilities. Captain Reynolds took Maria aside before the exercise began. "I'm putting you in charge of the main communications hub for this exercise," he said. "You've got the best handle on multiple channel coordination I've seen." "Yes, sir," Maria replied. "What's the scope of the scenario?" "Simulated attack on the base, multiple units responding from different positions. You'll be coordinating everything from the command center. Think you can handle that level of traffic?" Maria almost smiled. At FOB Phoenix, she had coordinated actual combat operations while the base was under real attack, managing communications for helicopter evacuations, artillery support, and medical evacuation simultaneously. A training exercise would be relatively simple. "I can handle it, sir." The exercise began at dawn. Different units took their positions around the base perimeter while Maria established communications links from the command center. She tested each channel, verified encryption protocols, and established backup communication methods in case primary systems failed. Morrison's patrol unit moved out first, maintaining radio contact as they simulated movement through potentially hostile territory. His radio reports were detailed and professional, demonstrating the training and competence that had earned him his position. "Control, this is Patrol 1. We're approaching Checkpoint Alpha. No contact, continuing patrol route." Maria acknowledged his transmission and coordinated with other units. "Patrol 1, Control. Copy your position. Patrol 2 is moving to Checkpoint Bravo. Maintain 50-meter separation from friendly forces." As the exercise progressed, the scenarios became more complex. Simulated enemy contact required units to coordinate their responses while maintaining communication discipline. Maria managed the increasing radio traffic with smooth efficiency, relaying information between units and ensuring that all elements maintained tactical awareness. Colonel Richards and other officers observed from the command center, watching how different units performed under pressure. They were particularly impressed with the communications coordination, noting how smoothly information flowed between elements. "Excellent work, Santos," Captain Reynolds commented as Maria seamlessly managed communications between 6 different units while simultaneously coordinating with simulated medical evacuation helicopters. This is some of the best communications management I've seen in an exercise. What the officers didn't realize was that Maria was operating at about 20% of her actual capacity. The simulated pressure of the exercise was minimal compared to the life and death communications she had managed in actual combat. Halfway through the exercise, the scenario escalated. Simulated casualties required emergency evacuation procedures, testing how well different units could coordinate under stress. This was where training often broke down, as soldiers struggled to maintain clear communication while dealing with multiple urgent priorities. Morrison's unit was designated as having casualties and needed to coordinate their evacuation while maintaining defensive positions. His radio discipline began to deteriorate as the scenario intensified. Control, Patrol 1. We got casualties here. Need immediate evacuation. Maria recognized the signs of stress in his voice. She had heard the same tone from soldiers in real combat situations when training gave way to adrenaline and fear. Her response was calm and methodical. Patrol 1, Control. Understand you have casualties. What is your exact location and the nature of casualties? We're at somewhere near Checkpoint Alpha. 2 casualties, serious injuries. Maria checked her tactical display and realized Morrison had become disoriented. His actual position was several hundred meters from Checkpoint Alpha, which would cause significant delays in evacuation if the information wasn't corrected. Patrol 1, confirm your grid coordinates. I show you approximately 300 meters south of Checkpoint Alpha. There was a pause before Morrison responded, his voice showing embarrassment and frustration. Control. Let me check our position. Chen's voice came over the radio next, equally flustered. Control. We need that evacuation now. These casualties are critical. Maria maintained her calm tone while coordinating with multiple units. Patrol 1, medical evacuation is standing by. I need confirmed grid coordinates for pickup location. Take your time to give accurate information. While Morrison's unit struggled to provide their exact location, Maria was simultaneously coordinating defensive positions for 3 other units, managing communications with simulated air support, and directing emergency medical teams to multiple locations. She handled the complex coordination with the same steady competence she had demonstrated throughout her assignment. Colonel Richards leaned over to Captain Reynolds. Santos is handling this like someone with significant experience. Where did she come from? Captain Reynolds checked Maria's visible service record. Looks like various administrative assignments. But you're right, she's managing this like someone who's done it before under real pressure. Morrison finally provided his correct coordinates, though his radio discipline remained poor throughout the remainder of the exercise. When the exercise concluded, different units returned to base for debriefing sessions. During the debriefing, Colonel Richards praised the overall coordination of the exercise while noting areas for improvement. Morrison's unit received criticism for their communication protocols during the evacuation scenario. Communication discipline breaks down under pressure, Colonel Richards explained to the assembled soldiers. In real combat, poor radio discipline can get people killed. You need to maintain clear, accurate communication no matter how stressful the situation becomes. Morrison looked frustrated and embarrassed by the criticism, especially since it had occurred in front of the entire base personnel. As soldiers filed out of the briefing, Morrison approached Maria near the door. His expression was a mixture of embarrassment and resentment. That was some pretty fancy radio work in there, he said, though his tone suggested it wasn't entirely a compliment. Thank you, Maria replied simply. Must be nice to sit in an air-conditioned command center coordinating other people's work, Morrison continued, his voice carrying an edge. Real easy to sound calm when you're not the one dealing with casualties. Several soldiers had stopped to listen to the conversation. Maria looked at Morrison for a moment, recognizing the defensive reaction of someone whose competence had been questioned in front of his peers. Everyone did good work today, she said diplomatically. Yeah, well, Let's see how you handle yourself when it's real," Morrison said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "When bullets are flying and people are dying, we'll see if you can stay so calm and collected." Maria paused for just a moment, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Davidson, something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, but Kumar, who was watching closely, saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not anger, but something deeper and more complex. "I'll keep that in mind," she said quietly, and walked away. As she left, Morrison turned to his friends with a satisfied expression. Finally, got under her skin a little. These desk jockeys need to understand their place. But Kumar continued watching Maria as she walked toward the barracks, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Morrison had just made a serious mistake. There was something about the way Maria had looked at Morrison in that moment, something that suggested she knew exactly what real bullets and real casualties looked like. Something that suggested Morrison had no idea who he was dealing with. The harassment escalated after the training exercise. Morrison seemed to take Maria's calm competence during the communications drill as a personal challenge to his authority among the younger soldiers. What had started as casual mockery evolved into something more deliberate and mean-spirited. During the 4th week of Maria's assignment, Morrison began staging small demonstrations whenever Maria was within earshot. He would gather a group of soldiers and loudly discuss combat techniques, making pointed comments about how support personnel wouldn't understand the complexities of real tactical situations. "See, the thing about room clearing," Morrison would announce to his audience while Maria worked nearby, "is that you can't hesitate. 1 second of delay, and your whole unit is dead." Of course, people who've never been in combat don't understand that kind of pressure. Chin had become his willing accomplice, often adding comments designed to emphasize Maria's presumed lack of combat experience. Right, it's not like coordinating radio calls from a safe bunker. When you're actually kicking down doors, everything changes. Kumar watched these displays with growing discomfort. He had started paying closer attention to Maria, trying to understand why she never defended herself against accusations that seemed increasingly unfair. Her work in communications was flawless, her military bearing impeccable, and her knowledge of protocols extensive. Yet she accepted the mockery without complaint. "Doesn't it bother you?" Kumar asked one evening as they cleaned equipment together in the communications center. "What?" Maria replied, though she knew exactly what he meant. "Morrison and his friends. The way they talk about you. Like you don't know anything about military operations." Maria continued working on the radio equipment, her movements precise and practiced. What would be the point in getting bothered? Kumar struggled to articulate his frustration. "It's just you know more about communications protocols than anyone on this base. You handle complex situations better than soldiers with years more experience. They don't know what they're talking about." Maria paused in her work, looking at Kumar with something approaching fondness. His outrage on her behalf reminded her of her younger self, when she had believed that competence would automatically earn respect and that unfairness should always be confronted. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "the best response to ignorance is patience. But what if they never learn? What if they just keep treating you like you're some kind of rookie who doesn't belong here?" Maria returned to her work. "Then, that's their problem, not mine." What Kumar didn't understand was that Maria had learned to pick her battles carefully. In Afghanistan, she had seen soldiers waste enormous amounts of energy fighting social hierarchies instead of focusing on staying alive and keeping their units safe. She had learned that proving yourself through consistent competence was more valuable than winning arguments. The situation reached a turning point during the 5th week when Colonel Richards announced that Fort Davidson would be receiving a special assignment. A high-priority convoy carrying classified equipment would be passing through their area of operation, and the base would provide security coordination and emergency support if needed. The announcement created a buzz of excitement throughout the base. Most soldiers at Fort Davidson rarely dealt with operational missions beyond training exercises. The prospect of supporting a real mission brought out competitive instincts among different units. Morrison was practically glowing with anticipation. During evening chow, he held court with his usual audience, speculating about the nature of the convoy and the potential threats it might face. "This is what we train for," he announced to the table. "Real-world operations. Not exercises, not simulations, but actual mission support." Chun nodded enthusiastically. Finally, a chance to show what combat-experienced soldiers can do in a real situation. They discussed various scenarios that might require base support, from mechanical breakdowns to potential security threats. Morrison's commentary focused heavily on how different types of soldiers would perform under real operational pressure. "The thing is," Morrison said, glancing toward Maria's table, "when something real happens, you find out who's actually prepared for military operations and who's just pretending to be a soldier." Maria continued eating while listening to their conversation. She had supported dozens of convoy operations during her deployment, coordinating communications for movements through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan. She knew exactly what real convoy security looked like, and it bore little resemblance to Morrison's theoretical discussions. Captain Reynolds called Maria into his office the next morning to brief her on the communications requirements for the convoy support mission. "The convoy will be passing through our sector tomorrow night," he explained, showing her the route on a tactical map. "They're maintaining radio silence except for emergency communications, but we need to be prepared to coordinate support if they run into trouble." "What kind of support might they need?" Maria asked, studying the map and automatically noting terrain features that could affect communications. "Could be anything. Mechanical breakdown, route obstruction, potential security threats. Our job is to be ready to coordinate whatever assistance they require." Maria nodded, already formulating communications plans for various contingencies. "Will we have direct contact with convoy leadership?" "Only if they break radio silence for an emergency. Otherwise, we monitor their progress through automated position updates and stay ready to respond." Captain Reynolds paused, studying Maria's expression as she examined the map. "You seem comfortable with this type of operation." "It's straightforward," Maria replied. "Monitoring, standby coordination, emergency response if needed." What she didn't mention was that this was exactly the type of operation she had managed hundreds of times at FOB Phoenix, often under significantly more dangerous circumstances. That afternoon, Colonel Richards briefed the entire base on their role in supporting the convoy operation. Different units received specific assignments: perimeter security, emergency response teams, mechanical support, and communications coordination. Morrison's unit was assigned to perimeter watch, monitoring approaches to the base in case the convoy required emergency shelter. It was an important responsibility, and Morrison's pride was evident as he discussed their role with his friends. "We'll be the first line of defense if anything goes wrong," he told his group after the briefing. "Convoy gets in trouble, they'll be counting on us to secure their approach to base." Maria's communications unit was tasked with maintaining contact with regional command and coordinating any support requests from the convoy. She would be the primary communications link between the convoy, base command, and external support elements. As evening approached, units took their positions. Morrison's team established perimeter observation posts while Maria prepared the communications center for the night-long monitoring operation. She tested all communication channels, verified encryption protocols, and established backup systems in case primary communications failed. The convoy was scheduled to pass through their sector between midnight and 3 a.m., depending on conditions along their route. Maria settled in for what she expected to be a quiet night of monitoring routine position updates. Kumar volunteered to assist with the communications watch, partly out of professional interest and partly because he had become protective of Maria. He arranged additional equipment, while Maria established contact with regional command. "Control, this is Fort Davidson Communications. Standing by for convoy support operations." "Fort Davidson, Control. Copy your status. Convoy Alpha is currently on schedule. Maintain monitoring posture until further notice." The first few hours passed routinely. Automated position updates showed the convoy making steady progress along their designated route. Maria monitored multiple communication channels while coordinating with different base elements. Around 2:30 a.m., the routine was shattered. Any station, this is Convoy Alpha. We are under attack. Request immediate assistance. Maria's training kicked in instantly. While Kumar looked shocked by the sudden emergency, Maria was already switching to encrypted emergency channels and coordinating with multiple response elements simultaneously. Convoy Alpha, Fort Davidson. What is your location and nature of attack? Fort Davidson, we're hold on approximately 15 clicks north of Checkpoint 7, taking small arms fire from multiple positions. We have casualties. Maria checked her tactical display while simultaneously contacting base command and regional support. Convoy Alpha, copy 15 clicks north Checkpoint 7. Can you provide more specific grid coordinates? While waiting for the convoy's response, she was already coordinating with Colonel Richards, requesting medical evacuation helicopters and alerting emergency response teams. Kumar watched in amazement as Maria managed multiple urgent communications simultaneously, her voice remaining calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around them. Morrison's perimeter team had heard the emergency communications and were requesting permission to move toward the convoy's position to provide assistance. Morrison's voice over the radio carried excitement and adrenaline as he volunteered his unit for immediate deployment. Base Command, Perimeter Team 1 requesting permission to deploy toward convoy position and provide fire support. Colonel Richards' response was immediate and firm. Perimeter Team 1, maintain your current position. Do not leave base perimeter without direct orders. Morrison's frustration was evident in his next transmission. Sir, the convoy needs help. We can be there in 20 minutes. Perimeter Team 1, you will maintain current positions. That is a direct order. Meanwhile, Maria was coordinating a complex rescue operation. Regional Command had dispatched attack helicopters and a medical evacuation team, but the convoy needed immediate tactical support to survive until help arrived. Convoy Alpha, can you provide exact number of casualties and their condition? Maria asked while simultaneously relaying grid coordinates to the incoming helicopters. Fort Davidson, we have 3 casualties, 2 critical. We're pinned down behind our vehicles. Enemy fire is coming from elevated positions to our north and east. Maria was relaying this information to the helicopter teams when the convoy situation deteriorated further. Fort Davidson, we're taking heavy fire. 2 more casualties. We can't hold this position much longer. Kumar looked at Maria with wide eyes as he listened to the desperation in the convoy commander's voice. Real soldiers were dying while they sat safely in the communications center. He felt helpless and frustrated by their inability to do anything but coordinate with distant support elements. Maria, however, was operating with the calm efficiency of someone who had managed similar situations many times before. She coordinated with artillery units to provide supporting fire, guided medical evacuation helicopters to safe landing zones, and maintained constant communication with the convoy to track their tactical situation. Convoy Alpha, attack helicopters are 2 minutes from your position. Medical evacuation is standing by at grid coordinates I'm sending now. Can you move casualties to evacuation point? Negative, Fort Davidson. We're pinned down. Can't move without suppressing fire on enemy positions. Maria immediately coordinated with the attack helicopters to neutralize the enemy positions before the medical evacuation could proceed. Her calm, methodical approach contrasted sharply with the chaos and panic evident in transmissions from the convoy. Throughout the emergency, Morrison's voice continued requesting permission to deploy his unit toward the convoy's position. His frustration with being held at base grew more evident with each transmission, especially as he listened to Maria efficiently coordinate the rescue operation from the communications center. The attack helicopters arrived on scene and began engaging enemy positions. Within minutes, the convoy reported that enemy fire had ceased and they were able to move their casualties to the evacuation point. Fort Davidson, Convoy Alpha. Enemy contact has ended. Moving casualties to evacuation point now. Outstanding coordination from your communications team. As medical evacuation helicopters transported the wounded soldiers to field hospitals, Maria continued coordinating with regional command to ensure the convoy could continue its mission safely. The entire operation, from first contact to successful evacuation, had taken less than 45 minutes. Colonel Richards entered the communications center as the emergency was winding down. He had monitored the entire operation from base command and was clearly impressed with how it had been handled. "Exceptional work, Santos," he said, watching as Maria continued coordinating with regional command. "That was some of the best crisis communication coordination I've seen." "Thank you, sir," Maria replied, still focused on ensuring all elements were properly coordinated for the convoy's continued movement. Kumar looked at Colonel Richards with obvious confusion. "Sir, how did she know how to handle all of that? It was like she'd done it 100 times before." Colonel Richards paused, looking at Maria with new interest. For the first time, he began to wonder exactly what her previous assignments had involved. As dawn broke over Fort Davidson, word of the night's events spread quickly through the base. Morrison's frustration at being held in reserve while the communications team coordinated a successful rescue operation was obvious to everyone who saw him. But something had changed in how people looked at Maria. Kumar wasn't the only one who had noticed how professionally she had handled the emergency. Soldiers who had previously dismissed her as a desk jockey were beginning to ask questions about her background. Maria herself seemed unchanged by the night's events. She completed her shift reports, secured the communications equipment, and prepared to head to the mess hall for breakfast as if nothing unusual had happened. But Morrison was waiting for her outside the communications center, and the expression on his face suggested that the night's events had only intensified his need to prove his superior combat credentials. Morrison intercepted Maria as she left the communications center, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The successful coordination of the convoy rescue had been the talk of the base all morning, and Morrison's frustration at being sidelined during a real operation had been building for hours. "Real nice radio work last night," Morrison said, blocking her path. His tone was sharp, and several soldiers gathered nearby, sensing confrontation. "Thank you," Maria replied calmly, attempting to step around him. "Must be easy to sound like a hero when you're sitting safely in an air-conditioned bunker while real soldiers are getting shot at," Morrison continued, his voice getting louder. More soldiers had stopped to watch, including Kumar and some of Morrison's usual supporters. Maria stood quietly, recognizing that Morrison needed to vent his frustration about being left out of the actual rescue operation. "Those convoy soldiers were fighting for their lives while you were playing radio games," Morrison pressed on. "If my unit had been allowed to deploy, we could have been there providing real support instead of just talking on radios." Chin appeared beside Morrison, adding his support. "Right, anyone can coordinate helicopters from a safe distance. But actually being in combat, making life and death decisions under fire, that's completely different." Maria listened patiently, but something in her expression had shifted. Kumar noticed it first, a subtle change that suggested Morrison was pushing toward dangerous territory. "You want to know what real combat looks like?" Morrison continued, emboldened by the growing audience and Chin's support. "It's not sitting in a communications center coordinating other people's fights. It's being on the ground with bullets flying over your head, making split-second decisions that keep people alive." "You're right," Maria said quietly. "It is different." Morrison seemed encouraged by what he interpreted as agreement. "Exactly. So maybe next time there's a real emergency, they should let experienced combat soldiers handle the important work instead of depending on desk jockeys with fancy radio skills." The gathering crowd had grown larger, and Morrison was clearly enjoying the attention. He had positioned himself as the voice of real military experience, contrasting his combat background with Maria's presumed administrative career. "I mean, no offense," Morrison continued, "but coordinating a rescue operation isn't the same as actually being in combat. Until you've had enemy fighters shooting at you personally, you don't really understand what soldiers go through." Maria looked at Morrison for a long moment. Kumar watched her face carefully, noting that the patient expression she usually wore was gradually being replaced by something else, something that made him instinctively take a step backward. "You're absolutely right," Maria said, her voice still calm, but carrying a different quality than before. "Being shot at personally is completely different." Morrison nodded, satisfied that he had finally made his point. "Exactly. Real combat experience versus administrative support are two totally different things." "Tell me," Maria said, her tone conversational, "during your deployment, how many times were you actually under direct enemy fire?" Morrison hesitated, not expecting the question. "Well, several times. Multiple firefights." "How many casualties did your unit sustain?" We had some injuries. Nothing too serious." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "What was the longest firefight you were involved in?" Morrison's confidence began to waver slightly. "I don't know, maybe 20 minutes? Half an hour." "And how many enemy combatants were you engaging?" "It's hard to say in combat situations," Morrison replied, becoming defensive. "You don't exactly stop to count." Maria's questions were asked in a tone of genuine curiosity, but Kumar could see that Morrison was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "What kind of weapons were they using against your position?" Maria continued. "AK-47s, some RPGs," Morrison answered, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments before. "Any heavy machine guns?" "Mortars." Morrison paused. "Some small mortars, I think." Maria nodded again. "That sounds challenging. I imagine you were pretty scared the first time bullets started flying." "Of course," Morrison said, trying to regain his authoritative tone. "Anyone would be scared. But training kicks in, and you do your job." "Absolutely," Maria agreed. "Training is crucial." "How long did it take you to get comfortable with incoming fire?" Morrison was clearly struggling now, realizing that Maria's questions were systematically dismantling his attempt to establish superior combat credentials. It takes time to adjust to combat conditions." "It does," Maria said. "I remember my first firefight lasted 6 hours. 200 Taliban fighters with heavy machine guns, mortars, and RPGs attacking our forward operating base. We lost 8 soldiers that day." The gathering crowd went completely silent. Morrison's face had gone pale, and Chin looked like he wanted to disappear. "The communications bunker took 3 direct mortar hits," Maria continued in the same conversational tone. "I spent most of that fight coordinating medical evacuations while shrapnel was bouncing off the equipment around me." Kumar stared at Maria with his mouth open. Around them, other soldiers were beginning to realize they had been witnessing something very different than what they had initially assumed. "During my 18 months at Forward Operating Base Phoenix," Maria went on, "we were attacked an average of 4 times per week. I coordinated 127 medical evacuations, 89 close air support missions, and 43 emergency resupply operations under direct enemy fire." Morrison tried to speak, but no words came out. "The longest single firefight I was involved in lasted 14 hours, Maria said. "We were completely surrounded, taking fire from all directions, with no possibility of evacuation or reinforcement until dawn. I maintained communications with 7 different units while calling in artillery support and coordinating counterattacks." She paused, looking directly at Morrison. "During that fight, I personally carried 3 wounded soldiers to the medical bunker while machine gun fire was hitting the ground around us. One of them died in my arms while I was trying to coordinate his medical evacuation." The silence around them was absolute. Even soldiers who had been passing by had stopped to listen. "I received the Silver Star for that action," Maria continued, "along with 2 Purple Hearts for injuries sustained while maintaining communications during enemy attacks." Morrison looked like he was about to be sick. Chin had taken several steps backward and was staring at Maria as if seeing her for the first time. "So you're right," Maria said, her voice maintaining that same calm, conversational tone. "Being shot at personally is completely different from coordinating rescue operations from a safe distance." She looked around at the gathered soldiers, her expression patient and understanding rather than angry or triumphant. "The thing is," she continued, "once you've actually experienced sustained combat, you realize that every job in a military operation is important. communications, logistics, medical support, maintenance, they all save lives. Kumar found his voice first. FOB Phoenix, he said hoarsely. That was one of the most dangerous positions in Afghanistan. Maria nodded. It was an interesting assignment. Morrison was staring at her with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Why didn't you say anything before? What would have been the point? Maria asked simply. You needed to feel important. My experiences don't diminish yours or anyone else's service. Chin stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment. We had no idea. Your file didn't say anything about combat assignments. Most of my service record is classified, Maria explained. Special operations communications often involves sensitive information. Colonel Richards appeared at the edge of the crowd, having heard the commotion. He listened to the tail end of Maria's explanation with growing understanding. Santos, he said, I think we need to have a conversation about your background. Maria looked at him with the same patient expression she had worn throughout the confrontation. Is that necessary, sir? Given last night's performance and what I'm hearing now, yes. It's very necessary. As the crowd began to disperse, Morrison remained frozen in place. The entire foundation of his identity at Fort Davidson had been built on his status as one of the few soldiers with combat experience. The realization that he had been mocking someone whose combat credentials far exceeded his own was devastating. Kumar approached Maria as she prepared to follow Colonel Richards to his office. Why did you let them treat you that way for so long? Maria considered the question carefully. Because their opinion of me didn't change who I am or what I've done. And because Morrison needed to learn something about respect that couldn't be taught any other way. What do you mean? He's been defining himself by putting other people down, Maria explained. Until he understands that every soldier's contribution matters, he'll never be the leader he could become. Kumar shook his head in amazement. You let him humiliate you for weeks to teach him a lesson about respect. I let him reveal his own character, Maria corrected. There's a difference. As she walked toward Colonel Richards' office, Kumar called out after her. What happens now? Maria paused, looking back at the dispersing soldiers. Morrison was still standing where she had left him, staring at the ground with an expression of complete devastation. Now, she said, we see if he learns from this experience or just finds new ways to make himself feel important. Behind her, Morrison slowly raised his head and looked toward the communications center where Maria had spent weeks quietly doing her job while he had mocker experience and credentials. For the first time since arriving at Fort Davidson, he was beginning to understand the difference between actual competence and the performance of competence. The question now was whether his pride would allow him to learn from that understanding or whether it would drive him to find new ways to rebuild his damaged ego. That question would be answered sooner than anyone expected. Colonel Richards closed his office door and gestured for Maria to take a seat. He spent several minutes reviewing files on his computer, occasionally glancing at Maria with an expression of growing amazement. Your actual service record makes for interesting reading, he said finally. Special Operations Communications, Forward Operating Base Phoenix, 18 months in direct combat operations. Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts, commendation for valor under fire. Yes, sir. It says here, you coordinated communications for Operation Desert Falcon, the rescue of hostages from Taliban compound. That operation saved 12 civilians and was considered one of the most successful special operations missions of the deployment. Maria nodded, but said nothing. Colonel Richards leaned back in his chair. Santos, why didn't you inform me of your background when you arrived? Your actual experience level changes everything about how we should be utilizing your skills. My orders were for standard communications assignment, sir. My previous experience wasn't relevant to those duties. Not relevant. Colonel Richards looked incredulous. Santos, you have more combat experience than anyone else on this base, including myself. Your expertise could benefit our training programs, our emergency preparedness, our operational readiness. Maria considered this carefully. With respect, sir, soldiers need to develop their own competence. Having someone with extensive experience take over doesn't help them learn. Colonel Richards studied her for a long moment. Is that why you allowed Sergeant Morrison to behave the way he did? Partly, Maria admitted. Morrison has potential to be a good leader, but he's been defining himself in opposition to other people rather than developing his own skills. And you thought letting him mock your experience would help him learn? I thought letting him reveal his character would eventually create an opportunity for growth. Colonel Richards shook his head slowly. That's either very wise or very patient. I'm not sure which. Sometimes they're the same thing. There was a knock at the office door. Colonel Richards called for them to enter, and Morrison appeared in the doorway. His usual confident demeanor was completely gone, replaced by obvious distress and uncertainty. Sir, Morrison said, I need to speak with Sergeant Santos. To apologize. Colonel Richards looked between Morrison and Maria. Comein, Sergeant. Close the door. Morrison entered hesitantly, standing at attention, but avoiding eye contact with Maria. His hands were shaking slightly, and it was clear he had been struggling with the revelations of the morning. Sergeant Santos, Morrison began, his voice hoarse, I owe you an enormous apology. My behavior toward you has been completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Apology accepted, Maria replied simply. Morrison looked surprised by her quick response. But I don't think you understand how terrible I've been. I mocked your service, questioned your competence, made assumptions about your experience. I understand, Maria said calmly. No, you don't, Morrison insisted, his voice cracking slightly. I spent weeks making you feel unwelcome here because I needed to prove I was better than someone. And it turns out you've done things in combat I can't even imagine. Colonel Richards watched the exchange with interest, noting how Maria's demeanor remained patient and non-judgmental despite Morrison's obvious distress. Morrison, Maria said gently, what do you think I should do with your apology? Morrison looked confused by the question. I don't know. I just know I was wrong about everything. The question is whether you learned something from being wrong. Morrison struggled to formulate his thoughts. I learned that I don't know as much as I thought I did. I learned that I was being an arrogant fool. Those are good starts, Maria acknowledged. What else did you learn? Morrison thought for several moments before answering. I learned that experience doesn't make you important. How you treat other people makes you important. Maria smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she had displayed since arriving at Fort Davidson. Now you're getting somewhere. Colonel Richards interjected. Morrison, I'm not going to write this up as a formal disciplinary action, but your behavior towards Sergeant Santos was unacceptable. How do you plan to ensure it doesn't happen again? Morrison straightened, some of his military bearing returning. Sir, I request permission to transfer to a different unit. I don't think I can face the soldiers who witnessed my behavior. Request denied, Colonel Richards said immediately. Morrison looked surprised and confused. Sir, running away from your mistakes doesn't fix them, Colonel Richards explained. You'll stay here and demonstrate that you've learned from this experience. Maria spoke up. Morrison, can I ask you something? Yes, Sergeant. What did you think would happen when you found out about my background? Did you think I would use it to embarrass you? Morrison considered the question carefully. Honestly, I thought you might. I thought you'd make me look like an idiot in front of everyone. But I didn't do that. No, you didn't. You could have shut me down the first day, but you let me keep talking until I figured it out myself. Why do you think I did that? Morrison struggled with the answer. Because you wanted me to learn something instead of just being humiliated? What did you learn? That respect has to be earned through actions, not by putting other people down. Maria nodded approvingly. Morrison, you have good instincts and solid training. You just need to trust those qualities instead of trying to prove yourself by diminishing others. Colonel Richards looked at Morrison thoughtfully. Santos, you said Morrison has potential. What kind of potential? He cares about his soldiers and wants to do good work, Maria replied. He just needs to learn that leadership comes from building people up, not tearing them down. Morrison looked at Maria with obvious confusion. How can you say that after how I treated you? Because how you treated me tells me what you thought you needed to do to feel secure. Now that you know you don't need to do that, you can focus on actually leading. There was another knock at the door. This time it was Kumar along with Chun and several other soldiers. Colonel Richards gestured for them to enter. "Sir," Kumar said, "we wanted to apologize to Sergeant Santos as well. We didn't stop Morrison from treating her badly, and we should have." Chun stepped forward, looking miserable. "Sergeant Santos, I participated in mocking your service. There's no excuse for that." Maria looked around at the gathered soldiers, recognizing a teachable moment. "What would you do differently if this situation happened again?" Kumar answered first. "I'd speak up when I saw someone being treated unfairly, regardless of what I thought about their background." Chun nodded agreement. "I'd remember that everyone's service matters, and I don't have the right to judge someone else's contributions." Morrison added, "I'd focus on being a better soldier myself, instead of trying to prove I'm better than someone else." Maria smiled at their responses. "Those are good lessons. But there's one more thing you should consider." The soldiers waited expectantly. Every person you meet in the military has a story you don't know. Some have seen combat, some haven't. Some have made sacrifices you'll never understand. Others have different kinds of experience that are just as valuable. She paused, looking at each of them individually. Your job isn't to rank everyone according to their experiences. Your job is to work together to accomplish the mission and take care of each other. Colonel Richards nodded approvingly. "Santos, how would you feel about leading some training sessions on leadership and unit cohesion?" "I'd be honored, sir." Morrison looked up suddenly. "Sergeant Santos, would you be willing to teach me some of the communications techniques you used during the convoy rescue? I want to learn how to do that job properly." Maria studied Morrison's face, looking for signs of genuine interest versus an attempt to rebuild his damaged ego. What she saw was authentic curiosity and a desire to improve his skills. "I'd be happy to help you with that," she said. Over the following weeks, the dynamics at Fort Davidson changed dramatically. Morrison, instead of trying to reassert his dominance, threw himself into learning from Maria and other experienced personnel. He discovered that admitting ignorance and asking for help actually enhanced his reputation rather than diminishing it. Kumar became one of Maria's most dedicated students, learning advanced communications techniques that would serve him throughout his career. Chun, deeply embarrassed by his participation in the mockery, worked hard to demonstrate respect for all base personnel regardless of their backgrounds. Maria found herself becoming an unofficial mentor to soldiers throughout the base, not because she sought the role, but because her combination of experience and wisdom made her someone others naturally turned to for guidance. The real transformation, however, was in Morrison himself. He gradually developed into the kind of leader Maria had recognized he could become. Instead of building himself up by tearing others down, he focused on helping his soldiers develop their own skills and confidence. 6 months later, when Morrison was promoted and transferred to a leadership position at another base, he sought out Maria before his departure. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for not destroying me when you had every right to." "That was never my goal," Maria replied. "I know that now. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. I saw someone who cared about being a good soldier, but didn't know how to express that properly." Morrison smiled. "I've been wondering, why didn't you request a transfer when I was making your life miserable? You could have gone anywhere with your credentials." Maria considered the question. "Because running away from problems doesn't solve them. And because every difficult person is an opportunity to practice patience and wisdom, even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. That's when those qualities matter most." As Morrison prepared to leave, he turned back one final time. "Santos, I hope the soldiers in my new unit appreciate what they're getting. If they don't, I'll make sure they learn." Maria laughed. "Just remember, they might have their own stories you don't know yet." Morrison grinned. Message received and understood. After he left, Kumar approached Maria in the communications center. "Do you think he really learned something permanent, or will he go back to his old ways when he's somewhere new?" Maria thought about the question as she performed routine equipment checks. People change when they want to change. Morrison wanted to be better than he was. He just didn't know how. Now he knows how. And if he forgets, then someone else will teach him the lesson again, probably less gently than I did. Kumar nodded, understanding. "You really believe everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow?" I believe everyone deserves the opportunity, Maria corrected. Whether they take advantage of that opportunity is up to them. As evening approached and Kumar prepared to head to dinner, he paused at the communications center door. Santos, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you ever regret not telling people about your background right away? Think how much easier things would have been if everyone had known from the start. Maria powered down the communications equipment and gathered her gear. Kumar, easy isn't always better. Morrison learned something about himself and about leadership that he never would have learned if I'd just intimidated him into respect from day one. So you think it was worth being treated badly for weeks? Maria smiled as they walked out together. I think every experience teaches us something, if we're willing to learn from it. Morrison learned about respect and leadership. I learned about patience and the power of letting people reveal their own character. And what did everyone else learn? That assumptions are dangerous, that everyone has hidden depths, and that real strength often looks like quiet competence rather than loud bragging. As they walked across the base toward the mess hall, Kumar reflected on the changes he had witnessed over the past months. Fort Davidson had become a better place, not through dramatic confrontations or formal discipline, but through the patient example of someone who understood that real leadership meant helping others become their best selves. Maria had never set out to teach anyone lessons or change the culture of the base. She had simply done her job with competence and dignity, treating everyone with respect regardless of how they treated her. In the end, that quiet example had been more powerful than any lecture or disciplinary action could have been. It was a lesson that would serve every soldier who witnessed it for the rest of their military careers and beyond.